Öğleden sonra oturumuna hoş geldiniz. Özgür Bey yemekle bitirmişti kendi panelini. Ben de yemek sonrasıyla başlatıyorum. Bu güzel organizasyon için ben Atilla Bey'e, Özgür Bey'e ve Aysun Hanım'a teşekkür ederim. Hakikaten çok kapsamlı ve bilgi edindiğimiz sonuçlara yönelik de neler yapabileceğimizi duyduğumuz bir ilk oturumdan sonra umarım ikinci oturumda benzer şekilde ilerler. Şimdi konumuz tabii aslında çok kapsamlı. Yani baktığınız zaman iklim değişikliği ve sürdürülebilirlikle nasıl mücadele edeceğiz? Buradaki muhtemel tehditlere nasıl sonuçlar üreteceğiz? Bunlar Türkiye'nin de gündeminde olan konular. Aslında iki başlıkta çok geniş. Yani hem iklim değişikliğine baktığınızda hem sürdürülebilirliğe baktığınız zaman kendi başlarına çok geniş iki konu olduğunu görüyoruz ve yakın zamana kadar biz Türkiye olarak bu konularda ne yapacağımız net değildi. Hala ben kafa karışıklığı olduğunu da düşünüyorum. Çünkü çok farklı sektörler çok farklı şekillerde etkileniyor. Bizim gündemimiz bugün için finans ve sigorta sektörleri olsa da tarım gıdadan lojistiğe, imalata, turizme, sanayiye, hizmetler sektörüne, ticarete aklımıza gelebilecek hemen hemen bütün sektör aslında iklim değişikliğinden etkileniyor ve her sektörde de bir sürdürülebilirlik hazırlığı var. Ama bu da net değil aklımızda. Yani çeşitli raporlar hazırlanıyor, danışmanlıklar alınıyor, toplantılar yapılıyor vesaire. Ama bir türlü somut bir hale getiremiyoruz. Umarım bu toplantı, bu somutlaşma adına faydalı olur diye ümit ediyorum. Şimdi hangi sorunu çözmek isterseniz isteyin, kısıtlayıcı çözümler aslında size yaranıza merhem olmuyor. Çünkü her sektör birkaç açıdan detaylı çözümlere ihtiyaç duyuyor. Bu çözümler kısmen ekonomik, kısmen politik, kısmen sosyal, bugün konuştuğumuz gibi kısmen de çevresel çözümler gerektiriyor ve dikkat ettiyseniz sabahtan beri bir kavram hep altını çizilmiş durumda. Bu da işbirliği. Biz Türkiye toplumu olarak işbirliğine biraz uzağız. Akademide de işbirliğinde zorlanıyoruz. Özel sektörde, kamuda, sivil toplum örgütlerinde ve bunların hem kendi içlerinde işbirliğinde zorlandığını görüyoruz hem de birlikte harekette de zorlandıklarını görüyoruz. Ama eminim bu panelde ve bugün ve yarınki diğer konuşmalarda da hep o işbirliğine vurgu yapılacak. Bunu aklımızda tutmamız gerekiyor. Yani burada çok zor, belki dünyanın küresel olarak bugüne kadar hiç görmediği büyüklükte sorunlarla mücadele etmek zorundayız ki önceki oturumda tartışılan Covid geçici, yani onlara çözümler şu veya bu şekilde üretilebiliyor duyduk zaten ama iklim değişikliği ve kaynakların her türlü kaynağın fiziksel, beşeri, sosyal her türlü kaynağın sürdürülebilir bir şekilde devam ettirilebilmesi ve kullanılmasından bahsediyorsak dediğim gibi bu işbirliği aslında çözüm önerilerinden biri olacak. Özellikle Türkiye'de buna ağırlık vermemiz ve bu kültürü bir şekilde oturtmamız gerekiyor. Bir diğer sorun da benim gördüğüm, sorunları teşhis etmekte çok zorlanmıyoruz biz Türkiye'de. Hangi sektör olursa olsun sorunları görüyoruz, bulabiliyoruz. Bunlara yönelik aslında çözümleri de yazıyoruz, tartışıyoruz, konuşuyoruz ama hayata geçirmekte zorlanıyoruz. Yani elimizde çokça rapor var, toplantı çıktısı var, eylem planları var, kalkınma planları var vesaire ama bunları hayata geçirmekte zorlanıyoruz. Dolayısıyla tıpkı işbirliğinde olduğu gibi bu hayata geçiş nasıl olacak, hepimizin üzerine düşen görevler nelerdir, bunları da dikkatli bir şekilde çalışmamızın faydalı olacağını düşünüyorum. Bugün 4 tane konuğumuz var, ben hızlı bir şekilde kendilerini tanıtacağım, daha sonra sahneyi kendilerine bırakacağım. Antoine Denoix, Aksa Climate'ın CEO'su. İngilizce devam edeceğim bundan sonra. Antoine Denoix is the CEO of Aksa Climate. After working at Google France, he co-founded 55, a global data marketing agency. And he states that their mission is to enable businesses to adapt to climate change through innovative solutions that combine parametric insurance, real-time alerting services, training and consulting. The second speaker is Marc Hartenbach. He's the head of Life and Health at Swiss Re, Turkey. He's been with Swiss Re for 14 years, 7 years for the Middle East and 7 years for Turkey, from which the past 2 years he served as the market head for the life and health businesses in Turkey. Our third speaker will be Paul Clark, who is the head of innovation and sustainability, natural resources, global line of business at Willis Towers and Watson. He has worked across a broad range of client, carrier, and NGO stakeholders to bring CTP, which is the Climate Transition Pathways, to market and secure insurance capacity for natural resources clients. And the fourth speaker will be Charbel Moussa, who is a partner at KPMG in the Netherlands. He is responsible for decarbonization and climate risk services. He has more than 15 years experience in the carbon markets, energy transition strategy, and greenhouse gas management, with a strong focus on energy-intensive industries. The floor is yours, Antoine. For 10 minutes, we would like to hear from you actually answers for 2 questions. One of them is, or let me start with the first one. Could you please describe in a few words what EXA Climate is and what is its mission?
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be with you today. AXA Climate, it's a specific business unit of AXA launched 5 years ago, only focusing on climate adaptation. So why do we exist? Because we are now more than 100 team members focusing on this mission. We exist because of a big question mark for the whole insurance space, and you know this question mark. How can we live in a world of 4 degrees, where a lot of properties, a lot of individuals, a lot of businesses will not be insurable anymore? So climate change, it's not a hobby for the insurance space. It's a key topic, it's a key challenge, and we need collectively at the insurance space to find solutions. That's why we wanted to start from scratch a new entrepreneurial journey to be sure that we revamp the value proposition of insurance from A to Z. It means that at AXA Climate, we cover, of course, insurance. So we deliver what we call parametric insurance. We are going to tackle the topic later in the session. But also we provide training, consulting, and financing in a holistic value proposition in order to support big corporates and public institutions in this very important transition to a more greener and a more ecological planet.
Thank you. There is a statement which says science is a key compass for transition. Could you please elaborate on that statement?
Yes, with pleasure. So I've been told that you need to be a bit awake after the lunch, so I hope you will follow me. So at AXA Climate, we believe that science is a key element and the key recipe of success if you want to succeed in your transition. So I have 3 questions, very simple one, because I know that you are all very expert in climate and environment. The first one being, how much of the Earth's fresh water is used by agriculture globally, in average? 70%, which is a good figure. Thank you for that. It's very impressive, and you can believe me, a few people globally across organizations, even from the agri-food, know these figures. Why is it important? Because, as you probably know, because of climate change, we are going to suffer more and more water scarcity stress. And in many locations in the globe, we are going to be able to arbitrate differently the way we allocate fresh water. And we are a growing population, and you can understand that agriculture is at the center of the matrix, at the center of the challenges, because we need to feed growing population, preserving also water availability. The second question for you, what is the most widely consumed natural resources after water? Who is brave enough to raise hand? An easy one. Sand. Sand is the right answer. Why I'm talking about sand today? Because when you are not really knowledgeable in terms of science and planet, you can have the feeling that we have a lot of sand. Because when you travel in coastal areas, when you are in Middle East, you have desert, and you can say, okay, we need sand, but we have sand in a kind of infinite limit. But it doesn't make sense, because most of the sand is used for building, and the sand that is proper for building is not coming from deserts. Unfortunately, the sand that we extract for buildings are from very fragile ecosystems like Mekong Strait, Detroit. And what I would like to tell you is understanding science is understanding how systemic it is. When you are taking sand from this specific location, Mekong Strait, you are also jeopardizing biodiversity. And you know that because of climate change, we are going to suffer sea level rise. And taking sands will even increase the danger of sea level rise. So it's really systemic, and we have many vicious cycles, vicious double effect and butterfly effect. The last one is the easiest one for you. You should be able to answer. Particle pollution generated by human activities can accelerate or slow down. An easy one. Slow down. It can seem a bit paradoxical, but the more we pollute, the more we reduce global warming. Why? Because when we emit some particles from plants, cities, municipalities, we block the sun and we avoid having this kind of greenhouse effect. If we have not been able collectively to pollute with particles for many years, we would have been half a degree even higher in terms of temperatures, in terms of global warming. What I wanted to show you is the fact that all is complex, and we need collectively be able to arbitrate between paradoxes. If you fight against pollution, it can, as a result, increase the global warming. I don't know if you remember this eruption of Moon Pinatubo. It was in 91. The effect of this eruption, putting some particles in the atmosphere, was to trap sun and to reduce in 2 years the average global temperatures of minus 0.4 degrees. As a recap of my little quiz, and thank you for your contribution, science is key. Why? Because you know that more than ever in our big corporates, we need to integrate what we call 9 physical boundaries. The planet is limited, as you know, in terms of water, in terms of chemicals, in terms of greenhouse gases. So more and more, we need to integrate these 9 physical boundaries inside our P&L, inside our decision-making, inside our strategies. And to be able to do it, we need to take scientists inside big corporates in order to better know what is around companies, what is the ecosystem, and how to integrate progressively physical materiality, like water, like sand, like greenhouse gases, inside the company. That's why our true conviction at AXA Climate is that you cannot succeed in your transition if you do not put science inside the companies. And all is about science. Decarbonizations, biodiversity, new transition in terms of energy starts with being knowledgeable about the environment.
Thank you, Antoine. So you had 3 more minutes. Maybe you can use this in the second round.
Perfect.
Okay. We'll continue with Marc. Yeah. No, the first. I'll ask you the questions. The first 2. Yeah. Since you are in the life and health industry, could you please talk about how the climate risks are going to affect the life and health industries?
Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. All right, before I start answering the question, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure being in Istanbul. I just want to give you a quick anecdote before I start. Yesterday I left Zurich, Switzerland, 30 degrees. We had 30 degrees. And I was really lucky arriving in Istanbul with a breeze of 20 degrees. So it was really nice to be here. And I'm looking forward for a good week here. So it's too hot in Zurich, Switzerland. So coming back to the question, no doubt, climate change being a large topic of importance for the world, it affects life and health in a very different way than P&C, property and casualty. The risks are much more long-term, and insured population have the ability to reduce their personal exposure. Climate change is a health emergency and impacts in many ways, increasing air temperature, increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather, worsening air pollution, sudden shocks, trends, and volatility. Think about last year's flood in Germany, where it caused 180 premature death cases, spread of vector-borne diseases, diseases transmitted by ticks, mosquitoes, and birds, and water and food insecurity. So with increasing air temperature, the body is unable to regulate himself, which can derive in heat exhausts and heat strokes. Persistent high temperature can stress the body and can amplify respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes mellitus, renal failure, and renal diseases. In 2003, a heat wave in Europe resulted in 70,000 premature death cases, and in 2010, a heat wave caused 56,000 premature death cases in Russia. Further, it can become a systemic problem and a shortage of work and labor productivity, but as well a shortage of health service, power shortage, and disrupt health facilities like transport and water infrastructure. Increasing temperature affects all population, but some are more exposed, like children, infants, pregnant women, manual workers, athletes, and unfortunately the poor. Worsening air pollution, i.e. breathing emitted toxins like high levels of ozones or heavy metal particles, is, according to the WHO, the #1 largest environment cause of premature deaths globally. Year by year, it causes 7 million premature death cases. So just showing some figures, the WHO estimates as well the damage cost of health to $2 to $4 billion year by year, and the climate change could cause approximately 250,000 additional death cases from 2030 to 2015. So no doubt, climate change is a health emergency and therefore has impact on mortality and morbidity. Expectations will impact the life and health industry the one or the other way.
Thank you, Marc. So in the first round, I have a second question for you. What role does the insurance sector have to play in the climate transition?
So generally speaking, there are multiple ways the insurance industry sectors can address the issue. One is formal and industry commitments to join the path to the net zero, such as principles for sustainable insurance, for the insurance industry to address environment, social and governance risk and opportunities, and introduce underwriting committees and underwriting frameworks to withdraw support from heavy carbon emitting sectors. For instance, not to provide any more reinsurance capacity for coal mining or oil drilling platforms. And on the asset and liability management, most relevant for life insurer, insuring assets which back their liabilities are invested sustainable. E.g., insurers should pulling away from CO2 emitting sectors that are failing to transmit and commit to net zero pathways. So the liabilities actually are promises to your policyholders' future health. Think about mortality or morbidity claims. If your assets are not invested in sustainable investments or investment vehicles, it's going to have an adverse effect on your liabilities. So long story short, on the journey to net zero, make sure assets are ESG compliant, the only way to be on the safe side.
Okay, thank you, Marc. So you also had like 4 minutes left, so we'll use it in the second round then.
Okay.
We'll continue with Paul Clark. Is he online?
Thank you, Gökhan. Yes.
Okay. Paul, I have 3 questions for you. One of them is, what is your view on emergence of ESG with a focus on the E part, the environmental part, usage in insurance? The second one is, what challenges does this pose for the insured in the absence of a standardized approach? And the third one is, how can the insurance market support an orderly and just transition? You have 15 minutes for your answers.
Thank you very much. And like Mark and Anton ahead of me, I want to thank you for the invite and the pleasure to speak to you today. Unfortunately, I'm doing it from a much rainier London, so I don't have the pleasure of 30 or 20 degrees, unfortunately. The first observation I'll make, and Mark touched on part of the role that we have as an industry in supporting that transition to a lower carbon future. But one of the first observations I want to make is how we've built up our understanding in how we can provide that support. Lots of our learning to date has come from the asset management community and how they have embedded ESG understanding in their decision-making frameworks, going back spanning a number of decades now. We've seen an industry pop up to support the ESG rating and rankings with a plethora of methodologies that now exist to assess predominantly publicly listed companies on their environmental, societal, and governance performance. Indeed, in 2018, we saw over 600 different methodologies in existence to perform that calculation and help with that understanding. And it's one thing that the asset management community have learned is that taking one of those methodologies or a single approach in isolation often isn't the best way forward. There was an MIT Sloan study done amongst the top 6 methodologies for rating ESG performance. And that study showed that the correlation between the top 6 was as low as 0.6, pointing to quite significant divergence being present amongst all really of the ESG providers. Now, that's an important factor because when we break that down, it shows that there is a different approach to the measurement, the scope, and also the weighting that goes into an ESG calculation and understanding. So as an insurance industry, what can we learn from that? Well, we're at a different stage on our journey when it comes to the asset management community. Our understanding and application is much more nascent. It's developing. We're at the very steepest part of the curve in figuring out how we can bring some convergence to what is currently quite a divergent marketplace. Initially, within the insurance space, we focused very much on the E, the environmental concerns, and that stems back to our history in building and understanding, excuse me, climate and catastrophe models. More recently, and throughout my talk today, I'm going to focus on the E elements. We've shifted towards that understanding of the transition and the implications that that will have. Now, let's not forget the S and the G. I'll just make very quick reference to those. And from a societal perspective, we have a good track record of implementing policies that help us address societal injustices. More recently, we've seen the resurgence in some of those policies come to life as we deal with geopolitical issues globally. But certainly society is something that should always be towards the top of our minds when thinking about how we help climate change and sustainability challenges. The final piece that I'll comment on very quickly, the governance considerations, that's something that typically focuses on the fraudulent areas, implications for tax purposes, and more recently on board composition. Again, there's no reason why we shouldn't have faith as an industry that will go on to build adequate solutions to those challenges. But it's something that we really need to view in a holistic manner. Now, as Marc referenced within his piece, insurers have begun to adopt certain exclusionary policies. And that is an approach. I'll discuss another approach later that we can take as an industry, but an exclusionary approach is a model that can exist. What we have seen from a number of insurers are that the models and the approaches being adopted typically fall into those of a black box. It's unclear for insureds how their data is being used and to what purposes in some instances. My esteemed colleagues from AXA and Swiss Re do a very good job of publicising their ESG policies, their stances on certain fossil fuels, but that's not something we see across the entirety of the industry. So this leaves us with insureds often being left frustrated and confused. They don't know necessarily how to choose their best partner. And when they receive responses to their tenders, which as a broker we're often front and center of, the considerations around climate are now another decision-making factor that needs to be considered when choosing your right insurance partner to support you through the transition. So if we broaden this out a little bit further and I talk about some of the other challenges that insureds face in the absence of this standardized approach, what I'll do is let me caveat my response by firstly saying that I work within the natural resources sector or industry. That's an industry that is largely considered as one of the heaviest polluters, and it has the greatest ability to impact climate change. Most insurers within our market, we've seen, have already made stances and come out with public policies on the operations side of their businesses. Now, and for the past 3 years, really, we start to see insurers giving greater consideration to their underwriting portfolios and how they can build in climate and broader ESG considerations into their existing decision-making frameworks. There was a study towards the beginning of this year of the Lloyd's market in London that showed at the beginning of the year, only 30% of survey respondents are currently building those factors into their frameworks. But equally, and a signal towards the pace at which this movement is happening, by the end of the year, that survey expects over 60% of respondents to have those factors built into their frameworks. So it's a very quickly evolving space. Now, Marc touched on coal as one of the asset classes that has received some of this initial focus. Along with oil sands and Arctic drilling, those were the 3 leading exclusionary areas that we saw really begin around 5 to 10 years ago, with certain markets withdrawing their support. And typically those markets have been the larger, more international, publicly listed insurers. What you can see from this diagram, though, is that actually there's a range of approaches being taken by the insurance markets. We have some markets in the context of coal who are still providing full support and offering full capacity to new or existing coal assets. Typically, those insurers are smaller or more specialist in nature, and typically they also happen to be located in parts of the world where coal still has a heavy dependence as the main source of energy. Now, across some of the other larger and predominantly more European and North American insurers, we see approaches that stretch towards the complete exclusion of coal from underwriting portfolios for both new and existing assets. Those approaches have been implemented over a period of time. And indeed, organizations like Insure Our Future keep us all honest in tracking those movements and those policy adaptations and ensuring that as a society, we are driving towards the right outcomes for the planet. Now, coal exclusions more recently, throughout the past 12 months, have begun to expand into other fossil fuels. And we've seen over the past 6 months specifically, the likes of AXA and Swiss Re, amongst some of their other large peers, coming out with their own exclusionary policies around oil and gas and how those will be treated within their portfolio. Now, what I'm hopefully doing here is picturing or painting you a picture of quite a complex and evolving landscape. It's an area where we haven't yet reached standardization, and there's still a great opportunity for collaboration amongst many of the industry's largest or larger players. The challenges that this poses for the insureds are that the role of the broker in helping to understand the different positions being taken is becoming increasingly important in that transaction. Insureds are looking to get a greater understanding of how their data is being used in these decision frameworks, and ultimately what data it is that they're being asked for. The question sets that exist in the market today are still evolving, and therefore year on year, renewal after renewal, there are requests for additional data or different data points. I made reference earlier to the fact that many of the ESG frameworks today focus on the publicly listed companies and publicly available data. So something we have to work as an industry is providing a solution for those organizations in private ownership. And how can we adequately serve them and ensure that they remain supported on their transition journeys? So listed methodologies. An opportunity that we're missing within the industry is to provide that feedback loop, both from a risk management perspective, but also to help accelerate the transition. If we can pool our knowledge as an industry and be sharing that with the insureds, then surely we can help to build better, stronger, and more robust transition plans to help us deliver the net zero future at a quicker rate than we're currently scheduled to do. So the final question, and how can the insurance market support that orderly and just transition? And first, let me be very clear. The opportunity here is vast. A report last month by the London and International Insurance Brokers Association highlighted that if the insurance market can get their support for the transition right, that could lead to an opportunity in the magnitude of $125 billion over the course of the transition. That's a significant opportunity, but one that will only be realized if we work together as an industry to support clients on their transition journeys. So how can we provide that support? Well, at WTW, we've been part of building an accreditation framework that focuses on the transition plan element of an organization. Now, it does so by choosing an approach of engagement over strict exclusion. It chooses to work with organizations and to filter our funds, our potential to enact change through the provision of insurance capacity, but beyond into financial capital provision as well when we think about deploying the investment arms of many of our largest peers. And it gives a framework to help funnel all of that support to the organizations that are executing against the right transition plan. And that's a really important component. What is it that makes up the right transition plan? Well, rather than coming up with that idea and developing those frameworks in-house in those black box models, rather as an industry, let's promote a methodology that is open source, that has been developed by independent third-party experts. It's a panel of NGOs and not-for-profits that have made or created the standard that determines what good transition looks like here. And for those organizations that can demonstrate the presence of those transition plans and that they've been adapting their business models to give them the best opportunity to deliver on those transition plans, then shouldn't we be funneling and directing our support, acting as stewards of the transition in helping those organizations accelerate as quickly as they possibly can? For insurers, it gives you the benefit of understanding the transition plans without having to upskill your own workforces, and gives you the confidence that it's an independent panel of experts who use the science to determine what good transition plans look like and therefore where capital should be directed. Climate Transition Pathways, it's an accreditation that is open to all of the insurance market, whether that be brokers, insurers, or other insurance actors. We focused it initially on the highest carbon and the highest polluting sectors, and therefore we'll be starting in the energy space, both electric utilities and the oil and gas sectors. But over time, the accreditation will extend into the building, the construction, the travel and the shipping industries as well, to provide a solution that spans across geographies and across industries. So my final remarks are that as an industry, we have a phenomenal ability to enact change. We have a great starting position, learning from complementary industries, but also the experience that we have in modeling and using data at the heart of the decisions that we're making. What we need to do as an industry is to collaborate, to break down some of the barriers around understanding, making our methodologies transparent, and to apply them consistently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. So we'll continue with Antoine one more time, then we'll go to Charbel. Antoine, while introducing you, I mentioned the word parametric insurance. So could you please give us a few examples of what you mean by that particular type of insurance?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will, with pleasure. But before talking about parametric, I would like to insist on the importance of the topic. I wouldn't like that collectively we think of climate as a side project or an external factor impacting our industry. It's really existential. It's a core business topic. Why? Because you know it in Turkey, but we see it in many other locations. Climate change is already here in terms of impact, be it sea level rise, storms, hailstorms, agricultural impact. So what is expected from us, it's important from all populations. When you talk with friends, families, or businesses, they are expecting from the insurers to send a signal on this topic. Because when you think of the ecosystem of our economy, societies, we are in the best position to provide this signal. Because we have scientists, because we can do some risk modeling, so we are more than others able to say to one business, what will be the climate in 10 years' time in your location? And I think it's very important as a call for responsibility that we take this mission very seriously. It's not just being purpose-driven for the sake of being purpose-driven, because it's really a key component of success in our collective transition. To go back to parametric topics, parametric insurance is one tool, among others, that can help us to reduce the climate risk for our customers. You all know how does it work, parametric insurance? Yes or no? So it's fully automated insurance contract. So you set up a weather indices through satellites. It can be drought, wind speed, peak ground acceleration, and you trigger payout for your customers after a few hours. So you do not need at all any loss adjusters on the field. It takes time, and sometimes it's too late for our customers. Two concrete examples of parametric use. When you want to be covered against storms, we have, you can pay you as a customer, as a big corporates, based on the wind speed that we can assess from the sky. So from the sky, we assess the wind speed of a specific storm, and we can pay a pre-amount of money directly to our customers after a few hours. Another example of parametric insurance is related to agriculture. Unfortunately, you know it, but all the agri-food sectors is highly impacted by climate change because of higher frequency of drought. And now with satellites, we can assess in a very high resolution of a few meters soil moisture, the level of humidity of the soil that is directly connected to the yield. So more and more, we have now millions of farmers that are protected across the globe through parametric coverage. As soon as we see a massive and very important drought, we can pay out and trigger a payout after a few hours. So it's quite a few examples of parametric insurance. So far, the parametric insurance product is a standalone market. More than ever, is going to be fully embedded in our traditional market, be it on the individual insurance product or being on the property and casualties products for big corporates.
Okay, so you talked about agriculture, but how about the agri-food sector? So how do you think you can provide solutions to the agri-food sector?
Okay, so let's say you have an agri-food customer, you are the insurer, you want to be committed. That's part of our mission. When you have a big cooperatives, for example, producing wheat, vegetables, fruits, what is the way to be committed as an insurer? What we are doing very concretely, what you also do with your customers is first to tell about the customers, to tell about the climate in 10 years' time. So what we are doing is we are supporting the cooperative, telling the cooperative, okay, you produce wheat, for example, at this level of yield, but because of drought, because of lack of frost, because of lack of precipitation, the yield will be impacted at this level. For example, for the French market, we have been able to tell to many cooperatives for row crops that they should expect a 40% decrease of yield in 10 years' time. So first, to give figures about the impact. Second, to finance. As an insurer, we can also finance what we call adaptation solutions. I will give you one concrete example. I'm sure you know what is drip irrigation. Drip irrigation system is a perfect system to reduce ecological footprint because you give a drip of water to the crop, and also you increase the yield because by giving the right level of water to the crop, you increase the probability of the crop growing. It's a great equipment for adaptation for the agri-food, but it's underfinanced. Why? Because investors do not like agriculture, because it's living, so there is a high volatility. So the way we can help is combining agricultural insurance product with this kind of new technology in order to be able to de-risk the financing from the investors for this very important topic for adaptation.
Okay, so the last question is, can you please explain what you mean by successful adaptation for big corporates?
Okay, I do not like one definition of adaptation. I call this definition the defensive and negative one. People say sometimes adaptation is just protecting against floods, it's just reducing carbon footprint, etc., etc., which is good and which should be also our priority. What we prefer at AXA and at AXA Climate is to fight for another definition of adaptation. For us, adaptation is transformation of the business model itself. Because of what we are going to suffer in terms of climate change, because of what is going to be required in terms of energy transitions, there is no big plan for big corporates to change their business models. And the way they are going to change their business models is integrating natural and social capitals. So I'm not an accountant, so I'm not telling you about accountability, but there is a massive wave of transformation coming from accountability. More and more, through the regulations, we are going to ask big corporates and large companies to integrate social and natural capitals into their P&L, into the way they assess and they create value. And it will be a massive change. Why? Because you know perfectly well that in the way we assess value today in the market, natural capital, zero. We do not take into consideration externalities, the water we consume, the ecological footprint of our activities. More and more, we are going to be able and forced to integrate these physical boundaries. And by integrating them, we are going to change the business models. And our true conviction at AXA Climate, and I would like to be also yours, is in the coming days, in the coming months, in the coming years, the key question for insurers will not be to apply another ESG framework, just to tick the box, but to be able to give capacities to adapted business models. I mean business models having done the effort of integrating social and natural capitals. And I'm quite sure that it will be a game changer in the way we build our communities, especially for economies.
Are these models specific for the agriculture sector, or are you
No, no.
borrowing them from other sectors as well?
No, just let's be serious. This kind of regulation and accountability will apply to all sectors of activities. I don't know in Turkey, in Europe it's already there. It's a massive trend. So it's not only agri-food, it's industrials, it's financial sectors, it's all what you can imagine. As soon as you have an ecological footprint, physical assets, you need to integrate more natural and social capitals.
All right, thank you very much. Charbel, finally we are...
So are you convinced that we should send a signal in this topic? Yes or not?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Charbel, for waiting. I would like to ask you about the task force for climate-related financial disclosures. Could you please explain us what you mean by that, and why is it relevant for insurers? Then, what clients should do and how to quantify climate risks and opportunities, and what can you say regarding the challenges in quantifications?
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on the panel and inviting me to participate. Actually, the wait was worth it because I will also bridge from what Antoine was saying about the business transformation. And for that, I would take a little bit more the corporate view here. So basically the client of the insurers rather than the insurers. All other panelists have, of course, presented the insurance point of view. I will try to be on the other side a little bit of the table here. Let me share a little bit, maybe a slide that will help. And then we talk about, indeed, what you mentioned as the TCFD, or the Task Force for climate-related financial disclosure. So we all, or many of us, might recall basically the financial crisis of 2008-2009. After that, the G20 decided to set up a financial stability board. And this financial stability board's role was actually to look at what are the inherent risks to our economies or to the major world economy that can lead to another financial meltdown. And of course, they went through a series of topics, mostly financial. And one of the first non-financial topic, but with great financial related impact, was climate. And here what we mean by that is basically today, many of us, and even when we hear some of the talks, right, that has happened before, we look at what we call the inside out perspective on climate change. So how companies can adapt, or how companies can change, right, or what companies can do in order to mitigate or adapt to climate change. However, there is a perspective now that is becoming more and more mature in the market, which is more the outside-in perspective. So what is the impact of climate on companies? And this is actually what insurers, right, let's say, care about. Because today, when you determine, as insurance sector, when you determine the premium towards a certain company or a certain asset or a certain facility, right, it's not whether, I mean, the premium is not decided only if this company has a greenhouse gas reduction target, because this is not what determine the risks, let's say, to that facility or to that company. But actually, it's the external impact on the company, on the project, on the facility that determines a premium. Now, insurance, we heard, had models to calculate these premium, mainly related or linked to historical data. However, many of the emerging sectors do not simply have enough historical data in order to give a good basis for actuarial, for example, to calculate forward-looking. I give you one example, floating wind turbines. Floating wind turbines is simply a new emerging, let's say, industry, right? Data is not yet enough to calculate with a certain level of, let's say, certainty or accuracy, right? What should be the premium in order to, for example, ensure a project of floating windmills. And this is why today developers of some of these projects have an issue with insurance, because not many insurance, for example, accept to insure on the long term, let's say 10, 15, or even more, which in return can affect the bankability of these projects. So this is where the TCFD really comes in, by hopefully offering some sort of a guidance to support companies in order to take the external factor, the climate risk, and then identify what are the risks or opportunity that can impact the company, then turn those into a financial impact, of course, according to multiple of scenarios, and then according to that, hopefully develop some climate resilient strategies. Now, the financial impacts can basically feed or be communicated to investors, who can also take into account the forward-looking risks or opportunity to their investment portfolio, as well as to insurers who are looking basically on the, let's say, the health of a certain company, project, or asset, and then determining the premium accordingly. And again, I have to be super specific. This premium is one factor out of many, right? But it's an important factor because it can ultimately lead to the destruction of an asset. And I give you an example, a physical example. In the past, oil and gas company used to deal with climate risk for their offshore platform by having them at a certain level, at a certain heights. And they used to do, one of the calculation they used to do, it is what is the severity of 100-year wave. So if there is a wave that can happen once in 100 years, how much this can impact, for example, offshore oil and gas platform. Recently, due to changes of climate pattern, due to changes of wind speeds, due to changes of waves height, okay, what we see is that new, for example, offshore oil and gas platform are being built 50 meters higher than the usual average in the past, because they have calculated that in order to mitigate, for example, a severe financial impact of 100-year wave that can occur more frequently, the current height is not enough. So they have added heights. Okay, this is a real example on how assets are also trying to adapt. Now, how company can go about this? It's a quite of a journey, but I just wanted to mention that the TCFD itself has a certain guidance framework that company can use in order to determine the gap between what they do today, how they act today, and what are the recommendations. And then from there on, okay, it's quite important that not only to do the calculations or to report on them, but actually to adapt the internal governance, the internal risk processes, and even the strategy, right, according to this work. And why am I saying this? Because again, like many of the recommendation or guidance document that company has sometime to report to, we end up, or corporate end up, developing a new work stream internally called the TCFD work stream, right? And this work stream do a lot of efforts. They do end up reporting or responding to the TCFD guidelines without necessarily having a feedback loop internally in order to take those recommendations internally and feed into the corporate brain. So one of the importance of TCFD is not only to do the calculation and assess and, but actually how to adapt, for example, the internal strategy, as I said, the internal processes and even the internal governance and internal implementation, whether on operation, engineering, design, supply chain, in order to take into account the lesson learned from, let's say, the TCFD assessment. So again, during this journey, one of the important milestone is actually identifying the physical and transitional risks and opportunity related to the company and their sector. And what is the difference between transitional and physical risk? Transitional risk are actually risks that companies could be dealing with on the journey towards a decarbonized economy. So, for example, a new policy in place, a new tax in place. In Europe today, we talk about the EU taxonomy or the CBAM, okay, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. All of these are transition, basically, events because they come in order to facilitate a decarbonized economy. But then next to that, there are actual physical events. So Antoine, for example, as part of his parameter insurance, spoke about some of the events they can insure against. Now, if companies have not taken, let's say, those assessments in their own operation, they will not take insurance for that. So this is where, again, the linkage between what companies do, what insurance offers, and how this can be triangulated. Now, one of the challenges, because you might say, okay, I mean, there is risk out there, there are climate risk out there, why companies simply don't do it and go to insurance in order to cover themselves? And this is where I would like to bridge to what Paul was saying earlier about the lack of a consistent approach or a methodology to follow, but also what Antoine is saying, this is a business transformation, not only point solution adaptation. And this business transformation mindset has not yet sunk in within the mindset necessarily of all senior management. So we still see the lack of buy-in from senior management in order to go about this journey. One of the key challenges for corporates to embark in order, let's say, to adapt or to transform in order to be fit for a decarbonized or a severer climate future. The other one is simply, as we said before, data availability, whether it's internally or externally, is very sparse, very disintegrated, and the quality of it is not yet at the level to be well counted for, right? So there is a lot of estimate, there is a lot of assumptions being taken, there is a lot of cutting corners into how scenarios are being done, and all of these add together to some sort of an inconsistency or a level of error that today, for example, auditors, investors, executive, and also insurers are not very comfortable to deal about, because if the margin of error, let's say, is within the 1-2%, people can factor it in. But the minute we go up to 7, 10, even sometimes 15%, it becomes too big of a risk in order for example, insurer to say, I can give you an accurate visibility or an accurate coverage or an accurate premium without having a wide range. For companies, for example, this lack of visibility is causing today, a lack of visibility in data is causing today quite a headache for senior management who wants to steer their company. Because senior management sometimes steer their company on a 2, 3, 4% basis, whether in terms of revenues, in terms of cost, or even in terms of target. But once these percentage points are within the margin of error, they don't know by the end of year whether they have met, for example, their target, or whether the cost is simply a matter of an error, or it's an actual outcome from the business operation. This is the headache today we are facing quite a lot with company we support. One of the final thing is, again, the risk integration, because today companies have well set up, let's say, enterprise risk management system, where sometimes climate features there, but because climate is not necessarily a frequent event or can happen once every few years, risk experts do not necessarily keep following on that to update it. But then when it's happened, it have a big impact. So this is one of the challenges also for risk experts, how to keep on top of a certain risk that might not materialize very often, but then once it materializes, it's really serious. Okay, I will not go too deep looking at the time into how scenarios are being done, but I just wanted to let you know that today scenarios for climate risk are not only a hypothetical exercise. They take into account actual climate forecasting. And today, whether some NGOs, some think tank, or some universities, research center, they have started to have some good climate forecasting scenarios according to different degrees of climate, let's say, heating, okay? Then we take input data from the company, so looking at their asset, let's say, footprint, looking at their type of operation, looking at their value chain, end-to-end value chain operation, supply chain. We take this in order to do a scenario modeling that actually comes with two outcomes. One is financial, and second is vulnerability. And vulnerability can be related to financial, of course, but can be an outcome by itself to say, well, some of your assets actually have, let's say, a low vulnerability. And as such, you might not want to go a step further and calculate a financial quantification to it. You leave it as it is, and you're happy to just monitor. Some of the other assets who have maybe a high vulnerability, then you would like to decide, okay, what is the financial risk I have there in order, for example, to take it to insurer and get an insurance premium on that. Internally at KPMG, we do have what we call a climate tool that actually can look all over the globe under several scenarios. And then also we take other factors than just climate. So here we move from the E to the S and G component that Paul spoke about. So yes, we start focusing on the E of the environment, but ultimately we know that climate change will lead to some social and even some governance issues, right? And when we talk governance, we talk about child labor, we talk about maybe different taxation or how company can approach, for example, the water usage, right? Do they take from the local community or not? Do they give themselves priority? If you are a brewer, do you give yourself priority over a local community or not, right? So this is why in our own climate tool, when we support corporate in doing their scenarios and understand the impact of their climate scenarios, we don't only look at the corporate boundary itself, but we also extend it to understand other type of risk that are available or could be emerging in the value chain of a company that ultimately can be as detrimental to their operation, to their reputation, right, and to their revenues as the climate. Okay, so I would like to leave it there. If you have further questions, please let me know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charbel. So we are finally back to Marc again. Marc, so we heard that the overall climate change will impact health in multiple ways going forward, and the actual health outcomes will depend how public health will react. So what would you propose that needs to be done?
Right. So health outcomes can still improve if public health services and governments respond in the right way. In general, greenhouse gas emissions must be reduced to net zero, energy transition must achieve 100% renewable as fast as possible. Deforestation in tropical regions must stop to cut transmissions route between new disease reservoirs and population. Catchword: to cut the spread of vector-borne diseases. So Lyme diseases, dengue fever, Zika, Ebola, and emerge of new vector-borne diseases transmitted by ticks, mosquitoes, birds, and eventually from human to human. Think about SARS and COVID. So going back to the life and health industry, going forward, in general, the life and health industry needs models and outlooks for excess mortality and excess morbidity developments under different climate change scenarios in the future. In terms of data modeling, we used to work with past data, but in order to consider climate change effects, we need to look into the future, which will change our modeling approach. It will result rather in a more stress testing and balance sheet resilient and portfolio modeling direction than using models at a single line of business level. The focus will be to embed sustainability in our life and health portfolios, find opportunities that close the protection gap in underserved communities, and grow it impactfully. Also to invest in more research to understand new and emerging effects on climate change. So let me give an example. To monitoring and reporting vector-borne diseases like mosquito spreads and tick bites because of the length of warm and season is changing in other parts of the world. So even in a country, in an alpine country like Switzerland, we see an increased frequency for Lyme disease transmitted by ticks. And as well, tiger mosquitoes have been detected in the south of Switzerland. Tiger mosquitoes can transmit dengue fever and Zika virus. So summarized, it's a systemic problem which needs a systemic change. Action has to be taken from individuals, regional, state, national, and on an international level.
Okay, thank you. Now the next question is based on the global protection gap. So we define the protection gap as the difference between the losses caused by the death of a breadwinner and the existing resources available of a given household. And we know that the global mortality protection gap is around 409 billion US dollars. For Turkey, the figure is 21 billion US dollars, and this corresponds to a mortality resilience index of 50%, which means that 50% is not covered by insurance or assets. So how does climate change affect the mortality protection gap?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to remind the protection gap in Turkey, it's quite an amazing figure. It's 41 billion US dollar, right? It's quite a big number. Generally, the mortality resilient index is higher in mature and advanced economy compared to emerging economies. It's anticipated climate change is impacting different parts of the world differently. Different population, different economies. And as we see that climate change is impacting the lower income population much more than mid and high income population. The main reason for that, they cannot afford to mitigate some of those climate risks. So think about they have no access or little access to health facilities, little access to clean water or hygiene facilities, or as simple, they just can't afford to buy air conditioning. So what can the life and health industry provide to increase resilience for the underserved populations like immigrants, for instance, or impaired lives, rural communities, or low-income communities? So what we have heard as well before, in general, the life and health industry shall intensify research and data collection, since for underserved populations, the data level is normally very thin or not available. But let me give some examples and ideas how we see where we see room for life and health innovation. On one hand, there is room to expand microinsurance, to provide simple health covers to protect the life and the human, not only the farm and not only the financial involved institution in case of a default. Or expand parametric covers, like Antoine explained, for instance, a parametric drought product to add simple health riders with the same motivation to look after the life and the human. Another example, explore emergency relief financing. It's as well a parametric product. The idea could be one parametric trigger is the air pollution level, and the other parametric trigger could be the intensive care level of a hospital. So think both are triggered, then the sum at risk could be paid to the government, and the government could finance immediately emergency case or capacity at intensive care hospitals. And for underserved communities, we are working on a solution to secure the care of severe handicapped individuals. So, of course, we need the local know-how of you to develop joint ideas and products to make individual societies and communities client resilient.
Thank you, Marc. And one last question, so you have a few minutes left. What would you like to say regarding Swiss Re's climate change strategy?
With regard to Swiss Re's climate strategy, we set 4 pillars. One pillar is advancing our knowledge and understanding of climate risks, so understanding the nat-cat risk and impacts of climate change. The other one is developing products, services to mitigate and adapt that risks, so climate risk, offering insurance protection against weather events and weather volatility, some of the examples I mentioned earlier. And then raising awareness, engaging in regular dialogue with stakeholders through different channels. Our flagship, Sigma, is one of the channels, or the Central Global of Dialogue, Swiss Re Institute, and cooperations with governments and academic institutions. And of course, Swiss Re supports, is committed and signed various agreements and initiatives to maintain its leadership in sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Bir 10 dakikalık soru cevap kısmımız var. 4 konuşmacıdan arzu ettiğinizde sormak istediğiniz sorular varsa onları alabiliriz. So we have time for the question and answer. So let's ask the audience whether they would like to ask any question. Türkçe de sorabilirsiniz. Ben elimden geldiğince çevirmeye çalışırım. So it looks like you have clarified everything. So yes, I would like to thank you very much for this. There is a question. I'm sorry. My apologies.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Radis Savosmilic from Real Stars Watson. I would have a question around the geopolitical influences that are currently evolving other risks related to energy in Europe. And those risks, would they, by your opinion, maybe delay or change your strategy around the energy transition and the not dealing with the dirty technologies within the energy?
Whom would you like to ask your question?
Sorry?
Who?
Mark, maybe.
Mark?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, can you repeat it? You know, I was not able to hear everything. Sorry.
Okay, it's more like when you look at the separate risks just on ECG side, on environment impact. So most of the insurers decided to set up a strategy to give up around the dirty technology and the carbon emission, to reduce it and to have the target around it, and you have a pathway to achieve it. Are the new geopolitical risks that are basically threatening the energy stability within Europe influence those plans and maybe delay some actions?
Okay, thank you. Now I got it. Yeah, I think there are both ways to look at it. On one hand, I think I agree it could delay, right? It could delay, but because of the nature of the situation, that there is the shortage of energy, and you need to support the economies, in particular in continental Europe. You all are aware about the situation we are in. But on the other hand, you could see it as well positive, right? Because it could as well accelerate to the transition, right? That there is a lot of pressure, a lot of financial money all of a sudden around, which is released to move to renewable energy. I think both ways are. I don't know in which direction we are going, but I hope in the second direction I was mentioning.
Başka sorusu olan var mı? Any other questions? I think that's it. So I would like to one more time thank you for the informative, extensive, knowledgeful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkürler değerli konuklarımıza. Gökhan Bey çok teşekkür ederiz.
Buyurun, ben size devredeyim sözü.
Ben aldım sözü sahneden şu anda. Çok sağ olun. Şimdi efendim hakikaten bu bölümde son derece faydalı oldu. İstifade ettik. Değerli konuklarımıza, 2 konuğumuz online olarak katıldı. Diğer konuklarımız burada salonda bizlerle birlikte oldular. Şimdi ben armağanlarını takdim etmek üzere Türkiye Sigorta Birliği Yönetim Kurulu üyesi Sayın Cemal Kişmir'i sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Buyurun efendim.
Sure, no problem. I thank you.
Hoş geldiniz. Nasılsınız? Burada.
Bak. Teşekkür ederim. Sağ olun. Eksik olmayın.
Arkadaşlarımız fotoğraf çekecekleri için lütfen biraz daha ortaya gelerek sahnede.
Biraz daha kayıyoruz. Teşekkür ediyorum tekrar. Sağ olun. Nasıl kapatacağız?
Bir aile fotoğrafı da alalım bu panelde.
Also, I'd like to thank the other, the gentlemen, both Paul and also.
Mikrofonu elinizi.
Sorry, and I'd like to also thank the other 2 gentlemen. Although actually they joined us virtually, but their contribution is very much substantial. Again, thanks for being with us, and thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Well, I hope to actually see you both in person next time when we get together here in Istanbul. Thank you. Very much.
Buyurun siz ortada.
Son bir kare fotoğraf alın.
Peki.
Çok teşekkürler efendim.